will
the
hear
best
you
part of
very
hubs.
well. Yeah.
I can recognize your voice.
Hey, so are you guys ready to go?
I'm good.
Yeah, me too.
Josh?
Standing by.
All right, let's kick this thing off. So
Which
I will.
hall are you in?
Oh, Linda,
West.
please look at the general chat, and you'll get a link there, and I'll also post it in social VR worlds.
Okay, thank you.
Run down the hall. Okay, so I spoke with Adrian for the first time about 6 weeks ago. I was referred to him by Liam Broja, who told me that there was this guy in Toronto doing some truly killer work. And Adrian and I had a nice long conversation about his amazing history of development and where he is at now. This is a guy who's breaking tons of ground. It's a hard road. And I'm excited about this talk. So Adrian, thank you for taking the time for us to share this with our new audiences. And I can assure you this video will be seen by people totally outside of your zone of influence.
That's awesome.
So thank you, and let's kick it off.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Adrian. In some hacker circles, I go by Avier. That comes from a book I wrote back when I was in high school. But yeah, anyway, I'm Adrian or Avier, and I've been doing this stuff for a very long time. Actually, we could go to the first slide right now, and I can kind of like explain what I do every single day. I basically wake up to this, which is my crazy ass setup with like 5 headsets, just a computer in a standing desk of my own creation, basically just 2 chairs on top of a table, and then just like a beastly computer underneath it. And just like the entire place is rigged up for doing nothing but VR. And although I own like basically the Ferrari of computers and like headsets, I own basically nothing else. I live super cheaply, and like I'm super happy to be in this position. Because I basically get to walk 5 steps out of my bedroom and then do what I love all day. If we could go to the next slide, you can see a picture of me doing exactly that. I basically just get up in the morning, I imagine things, I jack in, and then I wiggle my fingers for 14 hours a day, and things happen. Yeah, next slide. And so I would say I'm very #blessed to abuse that hashtag to be able to do this kind of thing. And this tweet that I saw the other day kind of like really stuck out to me. That like I realized that I'm in a very privileged position to be able to do this. Like I did have to work like really hard to get to where I am. But like on the other hand, I don't feel like I ever like experienced any sort of discrimination getting to where I am, or I wasn't afforded the proper opportunities. Like I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Waterloo. And so for the last 5 years, I would say I've been trying to like promote VR as like a way of life. And like, I truly believe that we're all eventually going to be living in the metaverse and like doing what we love. But this tweet made me like really realize that like we're so far away from all of this, and like maybe a lot of what I've been saying like doesn't resonate with people because a lot of people just can't make the leap to all of the things that we're talking about at this point, because they haven't been afforded those opportunities. And so that got me thinking, like, is this a technology problem? Is this like social problems? And like, what can we do to like solve all of this? So this talk is basically going to be about like working in the metaverse and what I feel like is missing, and how like maybe we can move forward into a world where creatives and people who just basically want to live the digital lifestyle can be afforded that opportunity. Next slide. So I remember back in high school, all the kids, including me, were like kind of like joking about like, you know, it'd be really awesome to live like the kind of life where you're playing video games all day and you don't have to worry about anything except just like playing video games. And like all of our parents would just be like, lol, that's never going to happen. And we believed them. And then so I found it really interesting that we have this kind of news article that's dropping like a few days ago, where Ninja reportedly just got $30 million contracts from Mixer, and now Mixer is down. So basically he made $30 million in under like a year for basically like nothing, no cost to him. So like things have really changed since I was in high school. And I found this like such an interesting like point in time, because the things that seemed impossible like 20 years ago are now just a reality. So it makes me think like what's going to happen in 10 years, what's going to happen in 20 years, and what are the kinds of crazy things that are that we think about as like completely unthinkable right now. How are they going to turn into reality in 20 years? Next slide. So here's just like one set of ideas that we've been discussing in various online communities that I'm part of. Basically jobs that are going to be things, or they might be things in 2030 versus 2020. Right now, it feels like all of these things exist in some primordial form, but they all basically look exactly like this. They look like people chatting in Discord. Whereas possibly these kinds of things also existed back when people were doing video games as a career. You had people, including myself, for example, that were recording VHS tapes of like speed runs that they did, and you would send them over to like, for example, the video game archive people, and they would authenticate whether your speed run was authentic. And whether you were the fastest in the world. And then like you discuss this stuff on forums, on like chat rooms. And it feels like that's where we are in terms of like these careers of the future. Except right now they're just happening in such a low fidelity way that people don't even realize that their careers that they could possibly be anything more. So in 2030, I'm going to go over like some ideas of like where we can be with builders, with people in the quote unquote 34 community, sleep simulators, with conferences, VR restaurants, and dark booths. And I promise these terms will make sense after we go through them. Next slide. So I think the one career path that a lot of people are excited about, and it's the most obvious that's probably going to be a thing, is just builders in general. And that includes crypto artists, world authors, avatar authors, and just people that kind of had a natural evolution from their career in art or design or video game development. And these things are just kind of like mishmashing together into these communities that are built on top of Discord, on Twitter, and inside of these virtual worlds like CryptoVoxels, Decentraland, and for example, even in the Japanese community, people that are just using Vroid and sharing things on various Discords, running commissions. This is already happening at this point, and I think it's like a foregone conclusion that probably this is going to be a serious career path for a lot of creatives, just being able to make digital things for people that need them done. Whether that's people that are just commissioning things that they think are cool, or yeah, and Jin's already doing it, by the way. Yeah, so it's probably just going to be people that need commissions done, or I hope at some point this also moves towards the enterprise. And I'm really glad to see what Hubs has been doing with just kind of like bringing virtual culture and avatar culture to the mainstream. And for better or worse, I think like the whole COVID situation has done a lot to accelerate that as well, where I think it's now acceptable for all of us to just be avatars at a quote unquote professional conference and to represent ourselves in this way. So I think like this is totally going to happen. Building. Next slide. This is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but I also think it's going to be huge. If you don't know what like Rule 34 is, it's like that there is porn of it. And I think this is totally something that's going to happen in virtual worlds and like in VR as well. I would say try Vertimate, which is like this simulator for like where you can build lewd characters. If you just want to try it for educational purposes, I promise you, you will be blown away by like how realistic like you can make things. It's like one of the best avatar builders. Even if you like get beyond its purpose, you have people that are doing like free commissions, just like doing artist work and like putting like characters in positions that like whatever they want to see them in. This is like a huge industry already, and I think like it's super awesome that like the furry community just managed to find a little niche where like people can actually make money, basically making each other happy. I think that's great. And also like you even see things like on Fiverr, you have like people who are saying, I'll just be your friend on one of these virtual worlds in one of these games. It's crazy that like all these things are like pretty much already happening, and I think like this is a thing that doesn't get reported in the news. I saw one article I think a month ago that was talking about what's happening in furry culture, but like I think this is totally going to be a thing. Yeah, next slide. Also, there's of course the whole conferences thing. I think a lot of people still don't realize the kind of work that it takes to put on a virtual conference. I know probably Karam knows better than most, but it's just a whole lot of work. And I think there's this misconception that when you're putting on a virtual conference, everything's just virtual, so you don't have to worry about the traditional things that you'd have to worry about, like security, like infrastructure, people. You think you're just going to blast up a link and things are just going to magically happen. It turns out that producing virtual conferences is probably not any easier than putting on a real conference, which is why I think like a lot of people are just going to make careers out of this. And I think some people in this room are already doing that right now. There's also the whole the conferenceations track, I guess, the hallway track, where the talks for the conference will set the stage. They'll set the keynote for like the kind of talks that will happen in the background, but the real value comes from the conversations that you have in the background, the people that you meet. And I can personally attest to the fact that like a lot of my career probably happened because of the people that I met at events like this. Super understated. I think this is going to be a huge impact on the industry. Next slide. Another thing that I found really interesting is one of my friends, she says that she can't fall asleep unless it's inside a VR chat with somebody next to her. I found that absolutely mind-blowing, but it turns out that this is actually a thing. There are people who just need that sort of companionship, and they found a technology and they found a way to connect with people that just basically allows them to have physical presence with somebody else when they can't be with people for some other reason. I think this is totally going to be like an actual thing that might evolve into maybe even dating, or who knows what kind of relationships people will manage to strike up. I just found this like absolutely mind blowing when I found out that this is actually happening and that people actually want this and people are actually doing this. Yep. Next slide. Another thing that we've been talking about in some of our communities is the idea of a VR restaurant. This one was one of the funniest ideas that we had because it seems like absolutely ludicrous, right? Like you're going into a restaurant when you'd think the main point of a restaurant is to eat food, and you can't eat food in VR. But I would posit that restaurants are for dates, not food. The food can be fake, but the date can be real. And I would probably pay money just to go to a virtual restaurant with somebody, to have that set date, to have that structure, and possibly to have people in the background cooking me fake food, just to have that social experience. And you can imagine integrating something like this with, for example, the Grubhub API, where the virtual restaurant can actually have a component where you're ordering real food that gets delivered to you, and then that's part of like the whole dating experience. I totally think that's going to happen. Next slide. Another thing that I was fortunate enough to be part of is basically an artist wanted to run an event inside a virtual market, which is the VR chat event where they basically put up booths and they sell their stuff. We didn't get a chance to be part of that virtual market, but the artist wanted to run something anyway. So just using one of our pieces of tech, we ran a scavenger hunt over top of the QR codes inside a virtual market. And the reward, once you've collected enough QR codes, is you get merch designed by the artist. And he was able to actually execute this anonymously without anybody knowing who like actually designed any of this stuff, which I just found like absolutely amazing. Basically running events inside of virtual events and empowering artists to basically create new mediums where previously they couldn't have existed. I think this is totally going to be a thing once we percolate some of the technologies that we've been developing, where you just get to overlay things on top of other worlds and create your own realities. Next slide. So yeah, that kind of like leads us into our approach of what we think is going to happen with virtual careers and how we'd want to empower it. I think we don't need any more technology. I think the technology is already out there. I think we need to plug it all in better together. I think things need to work together, and I think we need to base things on top of standards. Part of this is that I think avatars are really critical, and a lot of things just don't have very good avatars that can represent people. In fact, like I find the hub's friction to be a little bit too high for even myself to design myself a custom avatar inside of hubs. I think this is something where standards are really going to help, things like VRM, where just people can create against a single standard and then you can load that up into any sort of virtual world that you're using. I also think that the web is the best platform. It's the platform that we're all using it most of the time, whether we realize it or not. All of our quote unquote native applications, or at least a lot of them, are actually just web things under the hood, pretending to be native applications. You can count things like Slack and Discord even under that category. And not to mention, like all of us probably have 100 browser tabs, and we're looking at this presentation inside of a browser. The power of the web is that basically it tears down all of these barriers and everything kind of works everywhere at some sort of baseline level. I also think it's super important that creators that are making all of this stuff deserve to be paid. I think 2019 was the year of the reckoning for a lot of these VR companies that had like starry-eyed visions. Ultimately, they were like super creative. They got a lot done, but they didn't find a way to connect with their audience in a way that the audience could pay them. I think that's super important, and it's a problem that we need to solve. I think standards immunize us against the future. It's awesome that, for example, the things that James is doing to preserve existing content that was built against a standard. Back then, it was just WebVR, but now it's WebXR, and we can continue to visit all of this stuff going forward into the future, even if something happens underneath the platform. I think it's super important to be building against standards like WebAssembly, GLTF, VRM, and just the web in general, as opposed to proprietary engines. And I also think that it's important that the future is bigger than us. We need to think outside of our own bubbles, outside of our own technologies that we're building, and we need to have a lot more of these conversations. And I'm really glad that VRTO is providing that opportunity. Next slide. So just going to some of the tools that we've been building over the last, I guess, year, I would say. One of them is XR Package, which allows you to basically drop in multiple WebXR applications into a world. And this lets you run existing engines together with other existing engines. We're actually going to be running a hackathon pretty soon, where we're going to be presenting some of the WebXR applications that we've developed inside of hubs. We're not hubs developers, and we're just going to be using regular hubs. But we've just developed an overlay technology that allows you to basically blend multiple applications together. All this is just based on standards. It's WebXR. Any WebXR application can be packaged with this tool that we call XR Package or XRPK. And you just drop it into our runtime and it works. And on top of that, you get, of course, VRM avatars with inverse kinematics and a lot of nice, good stuff like that. Multiplayer too. And another thing that's awesome about this mode of operation is that if you upload your package to IPFS, anybody can download it and replicate it using the standard IPFS mechanisms. So that means you don't actually have to trust us to host any of your content. Another awesome thing that we've kind of been trying to build in here is there's blockchain integration for every single package. That means if you want your package to have some sort of rules of ownership, you can build that in just by adding the contract code next to your package. When you deploy it, it gets blasted up on the Ethereum network, and we're also experimenting with Flow as well, which basically allows you to code in the ownership rules for what your object is supposed to be doing. I don't have any clips of it right now, but over the last couple of days, what we've built is we've built a virtual credit card where you can just insert it into one of these vending machines and pull out one of the items that the vending machines gives you. And this is all completely secured by the blockchain, and it's an independent of any of our technology. Next slide. Another thing that we've developed is a browser called Metachromium, which basically allows you to run AR inside of VR. Over here, you can see us running multiplayer avatar rooms inside of Half-Life Alyx. And this is just a WebXR app that we built inside the browser, except with Metachromium, you can overlay it on top of any other Steam VR game, including pretty much the best and most demanding games, such as Half-Life Alyx. There's streaming features, there's blockchain features, you can pull out assets, and yeah, you can basically play games together and maintain presence. Another crazy thing that you can do is because Unity can be built into WebXR, you can actually run Unity games inside of Unity games. I don't think you can see that here, but yeah, it's another thing that you can do with some of our tooling. If you want to get it, it's on metachromium.com. It's not fully released yet, but you can grab a Steam key there. Next slide. Another thing that we've got developed is the registry for packages. Basically, this lets you upload any sort of standard package. You can see here we have VRM support, we have WebXR support, we have GLTF support, we have Vox support. And basically, any one of these applications can just be uploaded to IPFS using one of our tools. And then in any browser, including Metachromium, you can load it up and you can play with any of these things that you've made or any of these things that anybody else has made. Yeah, and you get all of these awesome features. And by the way, all of this stuff is open source, as I think it should be, as I think it needs to be for any sort of open metaverse, quote unquote. Next slide. Another thing that I think is super important, this one might have audio, maybe not. Yeah, but basically I think it's super important to maintain some sort of connection to communities while you're doing any sort of this work. I think one of the biggest problems that we faced in terms of trying to build out virtual careers for people is that a lot of these technologies simply don't talk to each other, and people aren't aware of what's happening next door. So it's really on us, I think, to be building these bridges, to be building these communities, and to constantly be sharing our work with other people to make sure that we're not duplicating things, we're not stepping on each other's toes, and we're trying to build a future that is as compatible as possible rather than trying to grab as much eyeballs from the other communities and like bring them over to ours. So yeah, we basically run weekly events called M3. You can see the logo up there, Metaverse Makers Mastermind, or Metaverse Makers Mixer, however you want to call it. We have a Discord channel, and pretty much all of the best ideas that I'm talking about here came from that community. They're not even mine. And another really awesome thing, I think that's super underrated, is just the moments of serendipity. I remember when we first announced what we were doing with Metachromium, that's when I met like probably one of my best friends. Just basically from that connection and from that demo, and like finally like us understanding like that we're doing basically the same thing and we should partner up. Yeah, next slide. And I think like also it's super important that we should just care more. um, I think like over the course of my career, that's like one thing that I realized is like I probably care really deeply about these issues where maybe some people, to them, it's just a job. Like for example, Magic Leap was not intending on supporting WebXR at all until I did it. For example, Firefox does not support WebXR yet at all. I don't understand why. I'm trying to get the Hubs team to support VRM avatars. I don't know why that's not happening. VR Chat, I am strongly for them implementing their scripting system inside of WebAssembly. I think that'd be awesome. Neos VR as well. And I think it'd be also super awesome if, for example, Decentraland supported VR. If we got all of these things together, we would probably be much closer towards the metaverse. And I think like it's just super important to maintain perspective and work towards a broader goal rather than just whatever we think is right in the moment. Next slide. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had. Yeah, if you want to reach out to me, it's hello@webverse.com. I'm not sure why this doesn't show on the slides, but we are actually hiring if any of these ideas interest you. If you're a creative or if you're an engineer, especially if you're an engineer interested in WebXR work, we are hiring. Or you can reach out to me in DMs on Twitter, Web Mixed Reality. So yeah, thank you. Hopefully we can all work in the metaverse one day. Are there any questions? Lol.
I guess there's a lot of work that you've been doing with open standards, and I saw that the ExoKit was sort of trying to maybe ignore some of the more secure concerns to be able to innovate on those standards. And now Metachromium seems to be maybe more focused on building on top of the actual, Chrome base, and maybe a different strategy. And so I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that decision of how you see the best way to bring about change. Is it to implement it in what could be easily adopted in something like Metachromium, or the value of seeing what's even possible that kind of goes off of what maybe some of the other uh, approaches are that have a much more focus on security? And with that security, if you go too far in the security, then you have no room for any type of innovation.
Sure. I think ExoKit has been extremely successful in what we wanted to accomplish, which is number one, just basically getting
the VRTO virtual one happening that I usually went to Canada for.
Sorry?
Wait, I don't know if that person knew he was unmuted or not.
Oh,
Or what-
okay. So yeah, in terms of ExoKit, number one, we had two goals actually. Number one was actually to get Magic Leap to support WebXR, which they ultimately did. And number two was to enable multi-app use cases. This is actually making its way into the standard. It's based on ExoKit. So in a sense, like we finally convinced the WebXR community that what we're doing is super valuable. And I'm super glad that now that work is happening in the standards group. It actually, I think a couple of days ago, the layers spec was moved directly into the working group, so it's no longer in incubation. It's just actually going to happen. So hopefully that answers the question about ExoKit. In terms of what we're doing with Metachromium, mainly what we wanted to do is to make sure that there was a way to run WebXR on top of existing games, so that you can run augmentations rather than just isolated experience. Because the main power of the web and the way that most people use the web is you use it as a multi-application engine. You're running 100 tabs at once most of the time. You're in so many different servers. You're on so many different versions of social media. I think it's super important that VR works the same way rather than you having to exit out of your VR application to meet somebody at a different location. I think everything should just be intercompatible. So that was kind of like the main goal with Metachromium. Actually, we haven't done almost any extra work on top of Metachromium, any extra standards work to make any of this function. It's just basically you alpha out the frame buffer and you compose it on top of Steam VR, and you just have to make sure that the math and the frame rate works out pretty well. But yeah, I'm actually really happy that like there's hundreds of people using Metachromium right now. Part of that could be just because the Chrome team hasn't really kept up OpenVR support. So like a lot of things are borked, so a lot of people are just resorting to using Metachromium for their WebXR support. But yeah, I'm glad that some of these things are going in the right direction. Also, in terms of like the whole multi-app thing and security, I think we've struck a really good balance with XR Package at this point because XR Package works on top of existing web standards. There's nothing new that you need to add. You just basically drop in existing applications and the system blends them all together for you. There's no security policy that's being violated there. It's just running in existing standard browsers and it's running on all the headsets. So yeah, I hope I answered the question there.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
I see a lot of consumers who dish their computers since their phone fulfill most of their needs.
Mhm.
Do you think there will be a switch where consumers will want to get a computer or a VR headset to be able to use VR, or will the developers make it more accessible for phones?
I think the market for AR is kind of different from the market for VR right now. AR is mostly just like bite-sized experiences, whereas VR is more like intense connections, things like actual meetings. But also I think like the Quest has done a lot to kind of like bridge the gap between the AR and VR markets, even though the Quest is not an AR device at this point. It's lightweight enough that like a lot of people I feel use it like a phone. You kind of like take it with you. You can kind of like slap it on whenever, play a little bit of whatever Beat Saber, play a little bit of VR chat. And you don't need a beefy computer, but you also have that option of connecting it up using Oculus Link to actually get that juice and to basically be able to run as high powered apps as you possibly could want. I think the future is probably going to be a mix of all of these things um, because the adoption curve for all of this technology is always just going to follow the power law or whatever. You're going to have the early adopters who want the bleeding edge and they're willing to go through a lot of really rough edges. And by the way, like Oculus Link is still pretty rough. And then you have the people who just like don't care unless it's accessible on their phones. But I think ultimately, like all of these technologies are going to be able to connect together so that it won't even matter. And then it's just up to the user's choice and their environment and their capabilities as to like how they want to interface with all these worlds. And that's another reason why I think it's like super important to be building on top of standards rather than, despite the companies wanting you to, I don't think we should be locking ourselves into any particular engine, any particular technology that has no plans for interoperability. I think that's a dangerous path to go down. Yeah. Any other questions? Why care about DCL or VR, for example? This kind of goes back to the point of like, I think we should be working with people rather than against them. Like, I know like there's a lot of people also that I've met that aren't fans of the direction that DCL took. But basically the Whirlwind Tour is like Decentraland was supposed to be this awesome VR world that's completely open and it's owned by the users. And then slowly like they kind of like degraded the trust of the community where like it's no longer going to support VR. It's no longer going to be based on the web technologies. It's going to be based on Unity. And just like ultimately it became just like another one of these Facebook type games where you're just free to play, kind of like paying coins to like waste some time. I think the reason that we should care is like we should go to like what people actually want to be using. If people want to like waste their time on like little Facebook games, I think like there is a good reason to like be able to support those people and to give them what they want. Like even inside of hubs, the reason that I often say that like the pen is the best feature of hubs, it's because like I just love to fiddle. I love to be able to basically take the pen and like draw like my little doodles as like I'm talking. Partly because like it helps me to like not be nervous, but like also because like I really like fidgeting. This also goes back to some of the restaurant points that I was making, where like the point of a restaurant is to provide the backdrop behind the social interaction that you're having. I think it's pretty important that we look at all these use cases that people are using, for example, Decentraland for, whether it's just like a time waster to kind of like give themselves a little bit of entertainment, whether it's to just socialize, whether it's to just brag that they have like some sort of high score. I would much rather see us working together and giving everybody the experiences that they want rather than just like villainizing any particular company because we don't like the direction that they're taking with the metaverse. Because like ultimately we're building this for everybody. We're not building this for ourselves. So we can't like let our disappointment with any particular approach kind of like disenchant us from collaborating. That would be my answer.
I guess one question I have is, what do you not? I mean, a lot of the stuff that's being created right now is being compiled down to WebGL, which is basically like a black box. It's not like a 3D DOM where, I guess like A-frame approach is having things into like, in some sense, you can get to the root of some of these different parts. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts, if you think that WebGL is going to be where it continues to go, or if you see something new, whether it's with WebAssembly or other ways to actually have like a full 3D DOM that doesn't exist right now.
This kind of goes into engine architecture at this point, but ultimately you have to use some sort of low-level API to render any of the stuff that we're talking about. Like, although Hubs is based on A-frame, ultimately what it's just doing is it's boiling all of this down to WebGL calls. So I think that level is going to exist, and it's going to require some sort of expert to be building that layer. But I think on top of that, we're going to have excellent systems, and Hubs is one of them, where you have layers of abstraction where you're thinking in terms of like the things that you're drawing in the marker. You're not thinking about the actual WebGL buffers that are underlying all of this. There are interesting innovations that are happening inside of these communities. Like, for example, WebGPU is becoming a thing. And I think even Apple is on board now with both WebGPU and WebXR. So there is a lot of innovation happening in terms of like speeding up the efficiency.
I think with the
of all these
question
global
of
things.
DOM and 3D, if you look in 3D, what the real equivalent of a DOM is the scene graph. And so when you talk about like web exports from Unity being this kind of like black box, Unity. Sorry, am I connected right now?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear
Okay,
you.
sorry. Okay, yeah. So like Unity could be exposing their scene graph through kind of external API calls. So like say I have a website and I'm embedding a Unity game, they could provide access to the equivalent of the DOM, basically, saying, give me this object, set this property on it. So that is definitely something that could be explored. But right now, just the mindsets of native app development that's just not really a place they're thinking. It's kind of like native app development. It's like you're developing a game. This game is a standalone thing. You
Absolutely.
ship it as an executable, So
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of like where I was going. It's basically like I think a lot of people right now are just thinking in terms of like a single engine, a single application, because this is how all of like these games and these VR applications work. You're running one thing at a time, and you're just expected to blast it down to low-level calls, and that's the end of that. What we're doing with XR Package and with Webaverse and all this stuff is like we're bringing that up one layer. We're basically moving us from a world of DOS where you have just like this one thing that's captivated your attention to a world where you can actually have windows or layers in 3D, and all of these things can start to interact. I think step one is we get these things to actually start running together through packaging and through all these other mechanisms, and then we can start to talk about like the different standards that we can build on top of that. Like for example, one of the things that we've been the different applications. So you drop in a GLTF model, or you drop in a VRM avatar, or you even drop in a full WebXR application like Hubs. And what our software actually does behind the hood, under the hood, is it'll snapshot the depth from all different angles of what you're actually rendering inside of the WebXR world, and it will generate the collision mesh out of that and export it as a GLTF that's part of the package. What that allows you to do is it allows multiple applications to know how to collide with each other. So if I load up a sword into Hubs, that has absolutely no knowledge of Hubs. It's not built on the Hubs API. It's just a model that I've brought in from some sort of different engine. Maybe it's even Unity. I can make that sword actually interact directly with the Hubs world, for example. But I think step one is just like making sure that everything actually runs together in the first place. Step two might be how do these different things start to talk to each other, and maybe we can start to think about standardizing them. Yeah, that's the kind of world that I want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
You're here. I'm snapping, clapping.
Thanks, bye.
Can you
Yeah,
guys hear
absolutely.
me?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, sorry. I have a bit of a noob question for people who may not have gone down the rabbit hole with the M3 group. I just wanted to talk about interoperability and being able to sort of port assets, avatars between worlds, nest worlds inside of worlds, and just speak this in a little bit more of a common vernacular. Can you talk a little bit about that vision of breaking down those walls and having that seamless kind of transfer of assets?
The question is specifically on the case of assets, correct?
Yeah, identity assets, can I be the same avatar in this place and this place? Just like the way we were moving between Janus and Hubs, and we had to kind of reset for that crossover. Can you speak a little bit on how that might be possible in the future and how privacy might work? It's a huge question, but just maybe touch on it.
So I think number one is we need to start building on common standards for something like avatars. We're still pretty far from that. I think the Japanese community has done a lot to kind of like standardize on VRMs, and that's being picked up by VRChat, which is the most popular social VR platform. But unfortunately, that's like not supported in Hubs. I've been arguing for that for like the last year. I think step one is to kind of like prove that there is a need for this to be taken seriously by the companies that are implementing all of these things, so that we can just land on a specific standard. But there's a lot of incentives right now that a lot of these companies don't want to buy into somebody else's standard, because everybody kind of wants to own identity, right? Everybody wants to be the one log on. Everybody wants to lock your avatar into their platform so that you identify with that platform and you're not going off to somewhere else. I think like that's the bigger problem that we need to solve, which is just we need to figure out what are the incentives for the different engine authors and the platforms to actually start working together. I think this ultimately just has to come from the users. You have to demonstrate that this is something that people want. And at that point, I think it's a no-brainer for the different platforms to start adopting them. A higher level like concern there is like, if we just have basically the ability to run one application inside of another application, I think this can inspire a whole new set of use cases. I mentioned Dark Booth, which was the scavenger hunt that was inside of another event run inside of VRChat. That actually got a lot of people talking to us about like, oh, how can I run my next event inside of like the next virtual market? Yeah, I think we need to kind of like keep drilling, keep asking questions, and like keep driving towards standards.
So I'm curious. You mentioned talking to hubs about VRM support. Have you talked to the XR Engine people or anybody like that?
If you mean Liam, yeah.
Yeah, Liam. Yeah.
They were inspired by us, so yeah.
Okay, good.
I wish like we could work more together. I think we're working on very similar things ultimately.
Mhm. I mean, I read
Yeah,
your website and I read their website and I go, okay, XR Engine and you guys have very, very similar goals and objectives. So I'm surprised there isn't closer collaboration.
I'm not really aware of what they're doing right now. But yeah, as far as I know, like basically they're huge fans of like what we're doing, and we're huge fans of what they're doing, especially considering like the open source XR community is still so small. Like you can't afford to like not know people.
Hmm.
It's
Um,
actually minuscule.
oh,
Um,
absolutely.
when we went on a couple of field trips with your group, I mean, there was the guys from Pluto were there, the guys from Crypto Voxels, the guys from AxoKit and
Mhm.
and it was like I could count the number of people that are running these things on my two hands. Um, and also I think Liam, I have to be careful what I talk about, but Liam is working on taking something like this and making it more robust and sort of breaking it off and exploring how it can scale. That was the first. I was also in part inspired by a talk with him about hubs as a viable platform, but their level of work was very expensive, and to pull off making something like this truly robust is a Herculean task. So there's that matter that Adrian said about like people have to get paid, and how much can you pay, and for how long, and how do you deal with that runway. But I think that's a different conversation.
I think in addition to that, there's, I mean, we're all working on the same thing towards like a kind of nebulous vision in the future, but we're all working on there's a lot of overlap, but at any given time, we're all kind of focusing on a different piece. So it's kind of hard sometimes to say, oh, great, you're working on this piece. I've thought about working on that. I'm gonna, kind of jump in and start collaborating. Because then you get into all these questions of like, oh, well, you're doing it with, oh, you're using TypeScript. I don't use TypeScript. Or, oh, you're writing it in Rust. Or, you're using this software programming pattern that doesn't quite mesh with the one I'm using. And like, all the little things that just like little barriers to collaboration that in the end, I think a lot of people, they see the like tasks that they have ahead of themselves that they have to take on. And they're like, well, I can sit and like try to like hammer this out with someone. Standards. There's a reason they take so long. Is because once you start involving more people, it's like, oh well, I hadn't considered that use case. Okay, let's rethink it. Versus, I think a lot of us have just taken the approach of, well, we're gonna kind of go full steam ahead on the part that we think that needs doing, and it's great when we can find those places where we can do the overlap. But it's proven to be one of the more difficult parts is getting all these projects to kind of come together on these things.
I think part of it is that most of these projects are not actually making any money, so there's no business needs, or there's very specific business needs, but like no general larger company that you could point to that's kind of that everybody can like rally behind. Which is why I think like a lot of people are just kind of like going independent and like doing their own like little projects that are bespoke and like fulfilling like a specific need for like a specific client, as opposed to like just kind of like working together on like one thing. I think ultimately like there will be like larger visions and like larger platforms, and then everybody's kind of like going to find where they fit in terms of that. I think there will be some sort of like YouTube, for example, like for VR, or like a Google for VR, whatever that means. I think these kinds of things are going to exist, and they're going to like blossom into much broader ecosystems. And with like everybody kind of like filling the role that they want to best fit into. Because right now it just feels like there's so much to do that like everybody just kind of has to do everything. And if like it doesn't fit in too neatly, then you just end up repeating so much work.
That's true. And at the same time, this is that kind of really liminal moment where it's just a sort of an ether, and it'll eventually coalesce. And when it does coalesce, let's just hope that it can still remain as creative and broad thinking and as advanced as possible. Because once things do start to get into that narrow funnel, they start to harden, as Greg Fodor put it the other day.
Mm-hmm.
So, in one way, we have to kind of just have that courage to walk through the darkness, even though it feels like it's been forever, and kind of take a moment to recognize what an incredibly creative moment this truly is, and have the confidence that it'll eventually coalesce. Um, and that's what I'm watching happen from the outside, and it's happening faster and faster and faster. It's accelerating now as we are in this new paradigm. Um, but let us know how. I don't know who us is or what I mean by we, but let us know how we can help, and give us the door, the interface, the way that people can help beyond just the hiring of developers and so on. What do you want people to see? What do you want them to talk about? How can you build a groundswell? When are you ready for that groundswell? Because nobody wants to build a ghost town either, right? We just don't know where to look necessarily at the beginning.
Yep. I think this ultimately just once again comes down to money and business models for basically everybody involved. I think, for example, what the crypto artist community has done with these virtual worlds is absolutely amazing, because like despite being very low fidelity compared to even something like hubs, some of these virtual worlds are absolutely amazing in terms of creativity and actually finding a funnel and finding an audience for all these creatives that just do want to ultimately work in the metaverse and be paid to do so. Crypto Voxels is just like an absolutely amazing community there. I think we need to find like more and more of like these little pockets of things where just things align in just the right way, and pursue them, and yeah, and make sure that it works out for everybody. I just hope that it's not going to be based on something like gambling or.
It always starts with gambling and porn. It always
Yep.
starts with that. Listen, Adrian, this has been a truly amazing journey with you, a crazy journey, and what a beautiful talk you just gave. And I really hope it inspires other people like it inspired me the first time I saw you do this. And thank you to you and James and Jen and all the crew and Bernie for doing this with us today. What we're going to do now is take a quick bio break, water break, and then we're going to meet with Kent Bai in the auditorium at 4:45 Eastern, 1:45 West. And Kent is going to give us his lowdown on how he feels about this whole first wave of virtual conference attempts. So let's meet up in the auditorium. I'll spam the link in here in about 6 minutes.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks, Bernie.
Sounds good. Thanks a
Thanks,
lot.
Bernie. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Thank you.